Before we go into this growth through adversity, I want to talk about what causes that adversity. And really what causes it is adherence to a set of beliefs that we have as Christians. It's holding to a standard or this absolute truth. We're going to talk about why it's important to hold on to that unchanging standard, even though it causes problems. I was thinking about, all the different things that we do in life and how there's a set way of doing them. And when I was a kid, I remember learning how to ride a bicycle. And you probably have that memory too, unless you never learned how to ride a bike, I suppose. And that could be some of us, you never know. But it was scary, right, to lose the training wheels and know that you were just going to go off into the yard and just pedal and pedal and pedal and maybe fall. And I did fall. I remember falling quite a bit in the beginning. But we just got back on, right? Even though we might have been afraid and we didn't want to get hurt and all this other kind of stuff, we just kept doing it because we wanted to accomplish this goal, and we just needed to learn how to do it correctly, how to do it right. And I think something similar happens when all of us learned how to swim, unless you don't know how to swim. But same kind of thing, right? You figure out the right way to do it. You figure out the right way to learn how to swim, how to float, how to paddle with your arms and make forward progress and not sink to the bottom. And it doesn't happen immediately, right? You have to learn how to do it. And in life, life is full of things that we have to learn to do successfully, right? And sometimes we don't, and we fail miserably. But we have to learn a proper method in order to master it, right? There's a set or a certain way to do things. And we have to conform our bodies and train ourselves in order to be able to master that skill and be successful in that goal that we have. If we want to learn how to do something like skydiving, you can't just go up in a plane and jump off, You have to go to a class first and learn how to do it correctly. Otherwise, you end up bouncing off the ground, And nobody wants to do that. So you just think about, all the things in life that you want to do. There are things that you have to learn and things that you have to master before you can do them. And Paul gives us a passage where he talks about learning how to win a competition, learning how to master certain things, and then comparing that to Christianity, right? He's saying that there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. So we're going to take a look at this passage. It says in 1 Corinthians 9:24 through 27, he says, "Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize?" He says, "Run in such a way that you may win," right? Do it the right way and put all your effort into it. It's essentially, we're going to talk about that, but everyone who competes in the games exercises self-control in all things. They then do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. And there is the spiritual connection, right? These runners do it to get a wreath of laurels, but we're looking for something that's a lot more lasting and important than that, right? "Therefore I run in such a way as not without aim," right? So he has a goal. He has a way of doing it correctly. And he says, "I box in such a way as not beating the air," because if you can imagine, that's not very effective, right? If you're throwing punches and you're hitting nothing but the air, guess what? You're probably going to run out of gas and not really score too many points. And he says, "But I discipline my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified." It's an interesting passage that really connects, the effort that we put into things in everyday life or things that we want to aspire to in the world, and saying, apply that same logic to your spiritual life. That's what he's saying there. So all through our lives, there are things that we want to achieve. In each case, we weigh the benefits of that success and the consequences of failing to do so. And our faith in Jesus Christ and our dedication to him has benefits. It also has consequences if we fail to do so. So Paul discussed beating in the air. That goals come from doing something with a particular purpose, right? Just blindly working on something, it's not enough, right? When you learn to ride a bike, if you put a lot of effort into it and we're doing the wrong thing, if you just approached it like maybe a chimpanzee, like just a crazy chimpanzee jumping up and down on his bike with all his might, but the chimpanzee still never learns to ride the bicycle effectively, no matter how hard he tries, because he's doing it wrong, right? And that's essentially the same thing. Christianity is similar to riding a bike or learning to swim in this way, that there's a right way to practice and to grow in it, and there's also a wrong way that gets you nowhere. It's spinning your wheels, right? You've heard that, or beating the air, as Paul would say. It doesn't have any effect. It's useless. It's pointless. It's like, well, I did all this stuff, but you didn't do the right things, right? It doesn't have an effect. Paul says to run in such a way that you may win, right? If you run in circles really, really fast, it doesn't matter how fast you ran in circles, does it? Because you're not going to win the race. He's saying there's a right way and a wrong way. And if you run to win, you're focused on the rules of the race, right? You're playing by the rules, an absolute standard of truth that you know that everybody has objectively decided will be the terms by which someone will win, right? And you have to do it that way in order to make forward progress. He also says in this passage, I discipline my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified. He explains that it is important to approach our faith with discipline, right? That it's something that matters. It should be a priority in our life, and that we should be disciplined about it, be serious about it. He reiterates the importance of following the rules, right? Because he says he doesn't want to be disqualified. If you don't follow the rules, you know what happens if you cheat, right? You've seen sports. You've seen maybe a boxing match. If the guy hits below the belt, right? He can get disqualified for doing that. Basically, references to running this race properly means that the Christian faith, in general, has absolute moral standards. It has rules that you have to go by, live by. It tells us the commands that we have to follow in order to serve God effectively. We can't serve God. We can't do what God wants by doing evil, for instance. If you do bad things, if you do things that God doesn't like, you're not serving him, are you? You're not doing what he wants you to do. You have to follow this standard of rules given by God. So we have this standard that we're supposed to follow, the things that we're supposed to do. We learn from the Bible what those things are. But we also learn from the Bible that those things that we're supposed to do come with adversity. They rub people the wrong way. They make people angry at you. They don't like it. Jesus said, if they persecuted me, they will persecute you also, right? He said that this is going to cause issues. But that's why you have to learn the rules really good. You have to learn the standard really well, don't you? Jesus describes this adversity in a passage that I want to share with you in Matthew 7:13 through 14 as the narrow and the wide gate. He says, enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is broad that leads to destruction, and there are many who enter through it. For the gate is small, and the way is narrow that leads to life, and there are few who find it. So what's he talking about there? He's telling us that there's a certain way to get to life. Being a righteous person takes effort. It's hard. They can't do as they please. Because if they do, then they're not following God. They're on that broad path. They're doing what they want to do. They're on the broad path and the wide gate they enter through that leads to destruction. And you know what I think is really cool about this verse is the second narrow. He says in the description of the path being narrow. It's a different word there. It's not merely describing a skinny path, right? If you if you can imagine, it's not just like a little path that you go down sideways or something like that. It's got some more significance than just being skinny. He's trying to paint a vivid picture for us that we maybe totally don't get from the translation. And I know I've been on a kick with all these Greek words and what they really mean. But, sometimes it's helpful to get a real clear picture about what it means, okay? This word for narrow is tethlemene, okay? It means to be squeezed in on all sides. It's like popping a grape. It's one of the descriptions for the word. Okay, that's what it's talking about. It's not just that it's a skinny path. It's talking about being squeezed. Like a crowd just all punching in and pushing in on you, and you're trying to get through. And if you can imagine, this is what Jesus had to go through a lot of times, right? He squeezed through the crowd and then just disappeared. And it's actually used in Mark 3:9 in the Sermon on the Mount, when he was concerned that the crowd was going to crush in on him, and he had to have a way of getting out of there, right? So this is what it's talking about. It's talking about being squeezed like a grape, and or being afflicted or being oppressed by the people around you. That's what it means. That's what the word means. That's really a better description for what he's saying there. And if we look at 2 Corinthians 1:6, this is the same word. You see that word afflicted underlined up there? That's the same word that Jesus is talking about when he says a narrow path. It's used for being oppressed or afflicted or squeezed like a grape, okay? He says, but if we are afflicted, it is for your comfort and salvation. Or if we are comforted, it is for your comfort, which is effective in the patient enduring of the same sufferings which we also suffer, right? So affliction that leads to suffering. So that's what he's talking about. And think about this verse again, right? If you go back to it, he says, enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is broad that leads to destruction, and there are many who enter it. For the gate is small and the way is narrow, squeezed like a grape, pressed in by the crowd. Just imagine the verse that way, that leads to life, and there are few who find it. It makes a lot more sense that you would be held back and pushed down and oppressed and having a very hard time trying to get to that narrow gate because you're being pushed in on by all sides, right? It gives you a much more vivid picture, doesn't it, when you think about that verse, that you're afflicted, oppressed, that's what he's talking about. That's kind of an interesting way, to look at the verse because it's giving us a more clear picture. That's what the word means. And narrow is just a very basic description of something that has much more connotation than that. So what Jesus is describing then is not just a stroll up a narrow path, but more of something closer to struggling through a gauntlet, if you know what that is about. You walk through these people that are trying to stop you from making forward progress. So what does that tell us then? Well, it tells us that being a Christian is a process of growing and maturing so that we can overcome the adversity of the world, so that you can push through that crowd that's trying to hold you back. The world is always trying to hold us back and impede our progress in following Jesus. We have to be focused on the moral standard, the standard that Jesus Christ has laid for us, the path that he has drawn out for us to follow. We have to be focused on that. We have to understand it. We have to know about it so that we can stay on it, even when we're being pushed and pulled and tried to be from all sides trying to get us off track. You have to have the knowledge of the absolute standard. And that knowledge is something that causes adversity. All right, so Paul, essentially he explains the same thing in his letter to the Ephesians, that you have to grow and you have to mature, you have to become strong in order to face the adversity that the world throws at you. And that's Ephesians 4:13 through 15. He says, until we all attain the unity of the faith. So until we do that, meaning that it takes time, and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to a mature man, to the measure of the stature which belongs to the fullness of Christ. So to get to that point where we totally understand where we are and what we're supposed to be doing. And as a result, right, we are no longer to be children tossed here and there by the waves, carried about by every wind of doctrine and by the trickery of men, by craftiness and deceitful scheming. So this is the pressing in, right? The narrow path. The narrow path is created by these people in the world that are trying to get you off course, trying to cause you to sail your ship into the rocks or the reef, trying to get you to crash and burn. That's what he's talking about. You need to know the absolute truth. You need to stick to that truth. And that's going to cause adversity for you because people are going to try to make you not do that. They don't want you to succeed because Satan doesn't want you to go to heaven. And Satan controls the world, and he controls and influences people to be an impediment to you receiving eternal life. That's what Paul is saying. Verse 15, it says, but speaking in truth and love, we are to grow up in all aspects into him who is the head, even Christ. So he's saying that maturity is a process. Growing up in the truth takes time, it takes effort, and it's something to be attained by dedication and by diligence. Paul also makes clear that the standard that we are working toward is to emulate Jesus Christ, right? To make Christ our goal. Absolute truth, an unfixed variable. Not how we feel, because how we feel changes. How the world feels about certain things changes over time. It's the wind and the waves that get pushed back and forth, right? Or the pressing that happens to this grape, that's trying to say, no, we don't believe that. You're not supposed to believe that. Society wants you to believe that evil things are moral, right? Paul says in Romans 1:28-ish neighborhood, around there, that there's going to be people who say that good is evil and evil is good, right? And doesn't society do that? Don't you see things in movies and on television that tell you that these are righteous and virtuous things that the Bible teaches us are evil? That is the winds and the waves. That is the trickery of men. That is the destruction that's wrought by Satan to try to push us on to the broad path. Hey, look, if you believe this evil thing and this sinful thing and you do it, then look how easy your life is, because everybody agrees with you then. Everybody's doing it. You probably heard that from your teenage kid. Everybody's doing it. Right? I think I threw that one out there, at one point when I was a teenager. Everybody's doing it, Mom. It's fine, So it's to not fall into that. Anyway, if we trust in God and we resist these pressures of the world, then it is worth it. All of these bad things that you have to go through, this adversity, this difficulty, this struggle that you have to go through, has a good thing that happens at the end. And that's something why we're all here, right? That's what we keep our hope fixed on, isn't it? James 1:12 says, blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, who goes through adversity, who goes through the difficulty that the world puts them through. Blessed is that person. He says, for once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Right? What's important to recognize, though, from all these scriptures that we have looked at today and have studied today is that Christianity, it takes effort. It isn't easy. It's not just a stroll in the park. And if your life as a Christian is a stroll in the park, that's probably something that we should look at and say, why? Why have I not faced adversity? Am I living in the world? Or am I doing the things that I'm supposed to be doing? Am I living as a Christian? You know, Jesus was crucified. Has anybody ever given you a hard time about what you believe? You know? It's interesting. Anyway, it's just something to think about. You know, I think about it myself. You know, is my life too easy? Right? I feel blessed in a way that sometimes when things go my way, I really feel good about that. But then I think, am I making it too easy? You know? These scriptures also tell us that there's a right way and there's a wrong way to follow God, right? We must be diligent to make sure that we're on the straight and narrow path and that we stay on it. Even though Satan is trying to push us off, whether we be a little boat in the ocean that gets tossed to and fro by waves or gets squeezed like a grape by the big crowds trying to push us in the wrong direction, we have to recognize that we're going to be afflicted or pressed in on all sides. Satan's going to take every opportunity to make you fail, because that's what he does, you know. He can't do anything with God. God is all-powerful. God says, as long as you stay with me, you're good, right? No one can take them out of my hand, Jesus says, but you can walk away yourself. Jesus doesn't force you to be a Christian. He doesn't say you have to do this. You can choose what you want to do. So he protects you as long as you are willing to accept that protection, right? Satan can't get you. He can't take your soul. He can't do anything to you as long as you willingly stay with God. And that's something that's important to remember. These scriptures also tell us that we need to be serious about our faith in God and put every effort into serving him. That it's serious. It's something that should take priority in our life. And that all these things, that they may not be easy, but they are worth it. And Paul talks about this at the end of his life, doesn't he? You know, even though he's in prison, he knows he's probably going to die soon. He sends this to Timothy in 2 Timothy 4:7-8. He says, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the course. I have kept the faith. In the future there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And then he says, and not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing. He said, this is a promise for me, but it's a promise for you too. That this is something that you have to look forward to. That all the bad things that happen in the world, that all the things that try to hold you down, that if you push through and go through the adversity, trust in God that he's going to get you through these things, that in the end there is something wonderful that happens. Truly wonderful. That we get to go to heaven. And that's where we all want to be, isn't it? We all want to be in heaven with God, to receive that crown of victory, that crown of righteousness, to have everlasting life, to take hold of that opportunity that Jesus gave us to take an active role in our life of faith. So where do we start? We start by learning the Word, right? We start by hearing. We start by believing in his Son, Jesus Christ, and repenting of our sins. And we start by getting baptized. Have you started on that path? Is that something that you would like to do? Well, I want to encourage you to come forward today, if that's something that you want to do, as we stand and sing our closing song.